Don't expect slides to teach every skill, right? Just using a slide won't cover everything. You design around the moment of application, which is what the learner needs to do. This point over here, which is what we're designing for. What will they need to do? What will they need to do? Where will they need to use the behavior is where you want to optimize for. Because remember, the right learning medium helps knowledge survive beyond that classroom. The classroom is a place to get familiar with the concepts. Your program is a place to introduce this and try and get them to become the normal behavior. Welcome to today's session where we are going to take a look at how to create staff training programs that actually transform behavior. One of the things that we find is a tragedy or an advantage in this modern corporate world is the fact that we are inundated with a lot of training, and I'm glad that those of you who could join are trainers in your various fields, and you can definitely attest to the fact that you have had to, you're called upon and you're told, hey, we need to do some training. We need to upskill people, and you need to come up with something. So the key thing here is we're not arguing about the benefit or if staff training programs are needed, if they're not needed. No, we are looking at how to actually do them in a way that they lead to behavioral transformation. Because one of the things we need to ask is, you want the team to go through the training and the training to also go through them. You do not want it to be one way. When they're going through the training, you as the trainer is the one that is deriving all the benefit and essentially having all the, well, you're meeting your KPIs, right? But if your audience doesn't actually learn and transform and you don't move them to take action, then your training can't be said to have been a success, right? So you have to understand that even though you're using a platform such as a learning and development one like Digestion, is that even though you put all your training there and we have all the automation set up, it doesn't necessarily mean that people will just pick up to it if it's not designed from the ground up to actually transform. So we're going to take a look at least 4 principles to basically understand, how do we train, how do we improve, and how do you create training that is more audience centered, take less time while doing it, and also build something that will lead to behavioral transformation. We have already gone through the reflection. So why do training programs exist essentially? So you find that first some event, sorry about that. So you'll find that an event will happen, right? Something, an accident, a loss or something of the sort, or probably people just realize that, hey, we didn't hit our numbers and we need to do something. And after this event, then you have this gap that is identified, right? So you have a gap that is identified as a result of that event. And then someone will say that we need knowledge. And in order to get that knowledge, a program is then created, right? So training program is created, and at this particular point, that's where you come in, or they bring you as an external trainer, or they buy this sort of training. Now, what we want to understand is, at this particular point, the aim, when you look at the event leading into the gap that was identified, the gap from the event, you understand that the aim is to transform behavior so that an outcome, a desirable outcome, is met. So the purpose of a training program is basically to transform behavior to lead to a desirable outcome. Even in the case of compliance, the point is you want people to understand what behavior to adopt that the agency that you need to be compliant with will essentially approve you on. So today we're going to focus on the 4 principles. 1, we're going to learn about digestion, right? How do you structure your training such that it can be, this is what you can say, how it's consumed. That's what I would say. So this would be how it's consumed. And then structure, progressively. How do you progressively reveal something, right? Progressively reveal concepts upon each other without necessarily just bombarding someone with everything. And a good one is how it's presented, right? How it's presented. And here we're going to talk about the format. What tools do you have at your disposal? A couple of tools. And how do you want to, in what format do you want to present the concept that you want people to learn? And then language is relatability, right? Relatability. And in this, you start, after we go through these 4, you should have a good understanding of where you need to improve on in order for someone to find maximum benefit. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how do you structure your content for digestion? And one quote here to understand is, you do not want to feed people an entire cow if just a piece of steak could do. And one thing we understand is sometimes the trainer focuses on what they need to present, and essentially effective training is something built upon what the learner needs to actually understand and do. Now, one of the things here, points that will help you structure well for digestion, right? It needs to be absorbed, or for better absorption, is using a couple of tools. So you want to structure for recall. For recall, not just exposure, right? And what does this mean? This is use questions, reflections, and scenarios, and also quizzes to basically help people learn how to retrieve ideas for themselves instead of them just seeing a slide. You see, if I had to present what I'm presenting right now in a mode that is just going slide by slide, without pausing to even engage you, you would feel like your mind immediately goes into passive mode, right? But when I ask you, think over time, and I say, hey, you need to understand this, and if I were to do so, I would follow up with a quiz. In other words, I would actually end up following up with a particular quiz to just help people apply the ideas instead of merely just seeing them on a slide. The other thing you want is to space out your learning, right? Space out learning. You want to, instead of cramming everything in one event, you want to have different concepts revealed over time, right? So you want to start with something small, and you essentially want to build over it over time. So you don't want to have, like, for example, these full day seminars you go and they do a knowledge dump on you. That's merely just to do a checklist, right? That we all know that's just to fulfill some sort of mandatory requirement, and there's nothing being digested there. So, spaced reinforcement over time with follow-up prompts, reminders, and practical challenges, rather than expecting one workshop to just lead to create lasting change is the way to go. And then the other thing around digestion that you want to optimize for is design for what's called the aha, moment. And in this way, what happens is you want to get them to the point where they see themselves in the behavior and understand why this is relevant to them, right? So, design for that moment whereby the concept lands. And a useful pattern for this is you can explain a concept briefly and then ask a reflection or scenario question and then revisit later with a short prompt. And that rhythm basically of under here, whereby you explain, right, briefly. For that, you explain briefly, and then you ask a question. And this is basically a reflection question. And then you revisit a concept later. What happens is when you do this, you will actually, when you find that I've explained something to you, so I've told you about digestion, and then I ask you, now think over time, whereby, how would you apply this in a training program that you're currently designing? And the other thing is following up with a question later on, which would be something like, revisiting the concept later on, which would be, remember that you need to apply this in that particular training program that you're doing. So it's this kind of rhythm breaks the monotony of supplying a whole dump of information by ensure things are chunked out. And the key realization here is that when people are able to recall and use that idea is when the training is actually successful, not just to say that they attended the session, unless that's what the goal was. So we'll go into the next part, which is structure. And this is really, really important. So after you've understood digestion, you have your material set up. The other thing is now the structure of it. Now in structure, we understand that you want to approach this as climbing stairs rather than climbing a wall, right? So this is, if there was an analogy, just keep that in mind, right? We want stairs, not a wall. That is one thing that we want to keep in mind. You want to move someone from simple to complex, right? You've structured it for digestion, so we're clear that someone will, you have designed it in a way to be consumed. Now the road, basically, if I was to call the journey, you have to progress someone based on where they're at today, based on where their audience is today, into where you want them to be, and you have to take into consideration their limitations for the present. So if you think about it as climbing stairs, it means that each step basically prepares the next, right? So basically each step prepares the next one. And the idea here is that the previous concept will be relevant in order to understand what's coming next. You already started them from, hey, this is the roadmap, this is where we're going. And that's a way of saying, this is the end, this is the hope of where you're going, this is a curriculum, and now we're going to start at this particular point. So what you just do here is, one of the things is just, move from simple to complex. That's the first thing. And practical ways of doing things is very, very simple. Just one, explain the problem. at each stage, you have to stay anchored on what is the big picture, and then just introduce one concept, right? Introduce one concept. And this is the idea of progressively revealing something. So you don't start with everything. You start with one thing, and then and then you start with a small thing, a much bigger thing, and so on and so forth. When you don't structure well, what happens is, and when your structure is everywhere, people tend to get lost, and confusion, you'll find, is often a problem with sequencing and not necessarily a motivation one, right? So when you start a session, right, start by introducing what happened last time, right? Start by saying, hey, now in the last time, what we did is this, in order for them to understand how it ties in. And that reflection is what creates the link, and someone can be able to see the whole part. So that's one of the ways in which you can structure, or rather you can use the principles to structure your course and to structure your training program such that someone gets, at the end of it, your audience has to transform their behavior. And this is one of the ways in which your training program will deliver this. So remember, confusion is often one of the factors is it's a sequencing issue, not necessarily a motivation one. Now, the other thing we're going to look at is the medium. And in the medium, this is the thing you need to understand. This is around format, right? Format. This is the meat. How is someone going to engage with your training? What are they going to see, right? So we understand conceptually how to design for digestion. We also understand now how to structure things in a way that you explain one thing at a time. As we said, you explain one thing at a time, you introduce one concept, and then you reveal that framework to the person only after, or rather the entire framework, only after they've understood the previous ones. And also you show them, basically you get to show them the journey after, once you show them the journey progressively. Now, when we're doing the format, the meat, you want to understand that different tools will serve a different purpose. So that is, if you're teaching someone how to cook, right? And this is a cooking example. You can have a couple of things to get them to understand how to make the recipe. And one of this is you can use a chef's demo, right? This would be something in a video format, right? The other thing you can also use would be an ingredients list, right? An ingredients list. And this would be paper or print, right? The format would be paper. And then you might also have a checklist, right? So, or a checklist of steps. And this would basically, you can have it on paper with the check boxes. Let me just say that. Paper with the check boxes. And what now happens is these are different. You've used video, you've used paper, you've used, there's instructional format on paper, and then there's also a checklist. And you have used different tools in explaining that particular concept. So you need to understand that your training the format should capture one key thing. Your format is dependent on, let's say, format is dependent on, and this is a key thing, what do learners need to do? What learners need to do after training? So your format depends on what a learner has to, let me just do that. Yeah. Your format depends on what your learner has to do after the training, right? So you have to ask yourself, again, teaching with the audience and their end in mind, the end behavior in mind, you are going to use the following. So consider using, and when it comes to the formats, let me just see this. Oh. Okay, let me just select all this and minimize it a bit. Okay, good. So when you want now types of format, right? So you want to use video for processes, right? So showing someone how it's done is always the best way of doing this. The good thing is you can record and then show someone. Now, video can't, however versatile it is, it can't always drive. It's not the best format for everything. It's not the hammer in every situation. Another tool you can use is discussions. For judgment exploration, right? Exploration. So you want to get people, if I'm teaching you how to paint, right? I want you to understand, okay, we have seen the video how to paint. Next, I'll get you in a group and then ask you, okay, what are your thoughts on what you just saw? And someone will be able to talk through what has just happened. And the other thing around this would be to use scenarios to practice decisions, right? You want scenarios to be used to allow you to practice decisions, or to allow your audience to practice the decisions that you want them to take, right? So after we are through with the discussion on the painting example in this particular case, the scenario now would be give them a brush, take them to a room, and have them actually or role play the situation, right? That's actually a training tool that you can use in your program. And if they're going to be doing something that is performance centric, you want them to use checklists or job aids, right? What you use at work to support performance. There's an R there. To support performance. So you're going to use as many. These are just 4 items: video, discussion, scenarios, checklists. There's role-playing, simulations, short guides, workflow prompts. And these are all skills or tools that can be used, different mediums that can be used to drive the point home. It is one thing for you to understand that don't expect slides to teach every skill, right? Just using a slide won't cover everything. You design around the moment of application, which is what the learner needs to do. This point over here, which is what we're designing for. What will they need to do? What will they need to do? Where will they need to use the behavior is where you want to optimize for. Because remember, the right learning medium helps knowledge survive beyond that classroom. The classroom is a place to get familiar with the concepts. Your program is a place to introduce this and try and get them to become the normal behavior. And the last thing that we're going to look at is language. Language. if I speak to you in terms that you're not used to hearing on a day-to-day basis, you are not going to understand, right? We could be speaking the same English, but I use academic literature, and you use academic literature. I just understand what's simple, and I will not be able to relate with you, right? Even though we're speaking the same language. One of the things to understand is you want clarity. Clarity is the goal, right? Clarity is not dumbing something down, is making it usable, right? If you're teaching an audience that's more familiar in using slang in their day-to-day, you're essentially not dumbing things down. You're making them more relatable, because you see, expert language can be a bit difficult to understand. While it favors the trainer, it doesn't necessarily favor your audience. So one thing you want to do is to, one, replace the jargon, right? Replace all your jargon. So don't use words such as, for example, if you're going to say something like cross-functional collaboration, which you as an expert, right, doing the program are familiar with, just break it down to what do I need? Where do I need someone to use this concept? And how does it relate today in their day-to-day? Instead of saying that, just use a practical explanation such as sales, operations, and finance solve problems together, instead of passing it between departments. That has already explained what cross-functional collaboration means without using a lot of jargon. The other thing we want to do is just make concepts more relatable. Make concepts concrete with more familiar examples, right? Who doesn't like a clear example, right? With more familiar examples. And in this way, you want to take what has happened and use scenarios that have actually happened. So you can imagine how training, when you go back to how trainings come about, you want to go back to this event, right? And talk about the gap that was identified. And in that, you now come and use that event in your training program to actually make the concept relatable, because they have some emotional connection and reality connection to that particular example. So the other thing is simply just use sorry for this. It is just use conversational language, right? Essentially, you want to use something that the learner understands. And even better yet, ask the person to explain something in their own words. So you can use the prompt, the next time I see this situation, I will, and the learner gets to fill in. You can have them say it in the words that they're familiar with, right? So this is ask learner basically to use own words. So ask someone, hey, tell me, what will you do? Don't use my words, use yours. And use the slang that you're used to. Make it relatable. Have them make it relatable for themselves. Or rather, allow them to use the language they're conversant with. Someone may not know your cross-functional team department or cross-functional collaboration language, but they understand the concept enough to break it. To say it in the way that they're in a language they're conversant with. So remember, if people can explain an idea simply, they're more likely to remember and apply it. Now, the great thing is to just bring everything together at this point is we have understood that in order to, design trainings that do transform behavior, right? In order for training to actually transform behavior, it needs to be designed for digestion, right? Have people feed them a steak instead of the whole cow. And you need to have people essentially just, following a clear structure. Again, staircase, not climbing a wall. And the other one is the right medium. Remember, the focus is the format should major on the moment of application. The format should help them understand, where am I going to apply? The format should relate to the place, how you deliver it should also relate to the place where they are going to apply this particular concept. And the other thing is, use relatable language. So have them explain present it use examples that they're familiar with, and also have them explain it back to themselves.